Tonight we will resume our George P. Shultz Lecture Series, and our speaker is Dr. Robert M. Gates, the Secretary of Defense. This event is sponsored by the Marine Memorial Association and the World Affairs Council of Northern California. The Honorable Dr. William J. Perry, our 19th Secretary of Defense, will introduce our speaker for this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the Honorable William J. Perry, the 19th Secretary of Defense.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce to you my friend, Bob Gates. I believe that Bob will be remembered as one of the best, if not the best, Secretary of Defenses in the 60-plus history of that position. So it was a great pleasure and a great honor that I give you Secretary Bob Gates.
It's a pleasure to be with you in San Francisco, but then I have to confess it's a pleasure to be anywhere but Washington, D.C. A place where so many people are lost in thought because it's such unfamiliar territory. I feel truly privileged to have been invited to deliver a lecture named in honor of George Shultz, a man who I believe will be remembered in history as one of our nation's finest secretaries of state. The Marine presence in Iraq came to an end earlier this year with the handover of responsibility for Anbar province to the Army. Marines left behind a stable region that had only a few years earlier been the epicenter of the Sunni insurgency. All told, the Iraq and Afghan campaigns have posed extraordinarily complex challenges to America's fighting men and women, forcing them to assume the role of diplomat, warrior, humanitarian, and development expert. They've shown what the late Marine General Victor Krulak once wrote was the adaptability, initiative, and improvisation that are the true fabric of obedience, the ultimate in soldierly conduct, going further than sheer heroism. The counterinsurgency skills the Marines developed during this past decade, combined with the agility and esprit honed over 2 centuries, well position the Corps, in my view, to be at the tip of the spear in the future, when the U.S. military is likely to confront a range of irregular and hybrid conflicts. Starting in June, we embarked on a sustained, multifaceted effort to move America's defense institutions toward a more effective, efficient, and cost-conscious way of doing business. As part of that broad effort, earlier this week I announced an initial set of major decisions designed to reduce duplication, overhead, and excess in the defense enterprise. I imposed new constraints on the size of staffs, senior positions, and contractors. I also directed that we better take advantage of economies of scale in areas such as information technology. And I announced the elimination of several organizations, including a 4-star command, that performed duplicative functions or had outlived their original purpose. I bear some personal responsibility for the United States turning its back on Afghanistan in 1989 and 1990 when I was Deputy National Security Advisor. When the Soviets left, we turned our attention away. We didn't do anything, leaving Pakistan with a huge problem. And then shortly thereafter, with the implementation of the Pressler Amendment, we had to cut off all of our military assistance to the Pakistanis because of their nuclear program. So that from the Pakistani standpoint, the United States, when our objective was completed, that is the ejection of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, we abandoned the area and left them holding the bag. Most people don't realize that the Pakistanis now have 140,000 troops on their northwestern frontier, northwestern border areas. They are in the fight. They are taking significant casualties. And they are operating on their side of the border and increasingly cooperating with our operations on the Afghan side of the border. And they have gone into places like Swat and South Waziristan, making al-Qaeda flee those areas. We see some activity in Sudan. We see al-Shabaab in Somalia trying to establish a relationship with al-Qaeda. And al-Qaeda telling them, the leaders of al-Qaeda telling them, don't focus so much on trying to take over your own country. Go after the United States. Go after the West. You need to get those guys out of the region, and then you can do what you want. I think one of the many worries I have about North Korea is that they appear to be starting a succession process. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Kim Jong-il's son, who wants to take over, has to earn his stripes with the North Korean military. What worries the Chinese, and I think justifiably so, but to the exclusion of everything else, is the prospect of instability in North Korea, or the collapse of the regime, which would send millions of North Korean refugees across their border. Consider this. Iraq in 10 years could be producing as much oil as Saudi Arabia and could be a very rich country. And if it is able to sustain the democracy that it has today, I think it'll change the entire equation in the Middle East. That's the optimistic scenario. There are all kinds of more pessimistic scenarios. But I think Iraq's future is open now. And it's a little bit like what happened in the Soviet Union in 1991. No one was sure what would come later. But for the first time in their history, the Russian people had a choice. And the future was open to them. I think the same thing is true of Iraq today.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, Secretary of Defense Gates, thank you, sir, so much.